Excited because so much of my journey with tabla actually began at this very workshop that we're at right now, 4 years ago. So, yeah, I thought, and so what basically how this will go is I have about a 30-minute lecture uh, that I want to present that dissects the compositional structure and the form of a traditional tabla solo. And then after that, I will perform a tabla solo, so you can hear an oral context of what I'm talking about too. So the whole program should be around an hour, and then if there's some questions you all have, I'm happy to take those at the very end after my performance. So if you have questions throughout my talk, I would encourage you to maybe write them down or even jot them down in the chat portion of Zoom if you'd like, and then we can talk about those at the end of the performance. So what I will do is I'm going to share my screen. I have a little PowerPoint here. Um, yeah, because so Shawn just mentioned that I was living in Benares, or in modern day it's called Varanasi, India, for about 6 months, and I returned to the U.S. Well, just about 3 weeks before the COVID lockdown commenced. So I thought it would be fun, since we're learning in this workshop about the Benares gharana, or the lineage of tabla playing from the city in Benares. I thought it'd be fun for us to take a little field trip virtually to see some video clips that I have from there, just to get a sense of what the city looks like and it sounds like before we talk. The first video I'm going to show you is actually a boat ride on the Ganga River, which is it's in the morning. It's a sunrise boat ride, and it's quite beautiful just to hear the sounds and the sights of people bathing in the river for religious purposes. This is a very holy river in India. It's in fact the most holy river, and so people are bathing and pilgrimages are happening, and you hear this like rhythm going on. And this is not a soundtrack. This is in real life what's happening, but you hear these little finger symbols that I have some just to demonstrate here, just going ching 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 throughout, something like that, and it's just quite beautiful to hear the chanting and everything going on as well. So I have 3 short videos just to give you a little sense of the beauty of Varanasi. So let me share my screen here. So, okay. And okay, great. I think it should be working. I'm just seeing if, okay. So anyway, I'll go ahead and start this, and you can experience a little bit of Benares on the river. The next video, I thought I would show the complete opposite of that. So there's this very spiritual, just tranquility about Varanasi that you experience from that. And then on the flip side, it's an extremely chaotic city. So this is just my day-to-day walk every single day back to my house. I would have to cross through this intersection and basically pray for my life that I would survive and make it to the other side. While it was scary at first, I came to appreciate the chaos. Actually, it had its own beauty in a way, just this organicness about it. And then the third thing I wanted to show you all was this music festival. So there's festivals that happen in Benares, I think nearly every day of the year. It's just there's always some sort of festival going on, and this particular one is a music festival happening all day long. This video is taken at 7 in the morning. There's live music going on, and I saw to my left this man doing some intense yoga, and I was just awestruck by it. So I thought I'd share this as well. So those are just a few clips I thought I would share to kind of transport us over to Varanasi for this lecture, and just get a sense of some of the beauty of that city. So the title of my lecture is Deconstructing the Tabla Solo, a visual analysis using the Mativetsky notation system. And the genesis of this entire research project really, I guess, began with my journey with tabla. When I started playing the instrument about 4 years ago, I randomly received a set of tabla from my parents for Christmas, and my background is I'm a Western percussionist, so I play a lot of different percussion instruments and have grown up and do so professionally as well. But I never once in my life have touched these drums. I've seen them performed before in different conventions and different concert settings, but I never thought in a million years that I would ever be able to play it. One, because I just didn't know a teacher that taught the drums, and I don't know. It's not like I didn't encounter it in any of my my lessons or classes growing up, so it seemed very foreign to me. But then, sure enough, I got these drums for Christmas, and then in January of 2016, I was living in Nashville, Tennessee at the time, just finishing up my master's, and I was like, well, I got to learn these drums now. So I found, just through some mutual friends, finally somebody that played the instrument. So for about 4 months, he was able to teach me some basic technique about the drums, but I just felt like I had no idea where to start. He would mention kaida, let's learn a kaida now, and let's learn, a gut or something. And I was like, well, hold on, what do these words mean, first of all? What is this, like, oral tradition that you're like speaking, you're like teaching me through? And I just had so many questions, and I didn't know where to look to just, like, on my own terms, kind of like see what I'm getting myself into. I had no idea, like, what a kaida meant in relation to a larger tabla solo. And so I was searching for some sort of resource or guide that would at least just let me, in my own privacy, read from a bird's eye view, in a way, of like what I was getting myself into, and just sort of see how a tabla solo progressed, just to have some more general guide, I guess. But that didn't exist. I mean, there's a million different YouTube videos, and each person has their own different interpretation about things, but I was looking for something tangible. And as a Western musician, I of course was hoping for something with Western notation, but of course that didn't exist. This is not a Western instrument. So then, after about 4 months, I moved to Michigan to begin my doctorate at Michigan State University, and I came across Shawn Mativetsky through some flyer at a school I was visiting, I think, and then I did some more research on him and found this amazing notation system, this Western notation system for tabla that he and Peyton McDonald had created. And then I did some more research and found out, this is to bring tabla into Western contexts so that composers can write for this instrument and to play with other Western instruments. And it really resonated with me, and I was like, this seems like a cool idea. So then I found out that there were some pieces composed using that notation system. I got to know Shawn. I came to this very workshop for the first time in 2017. We continued doing Skype lessons at the time, and I started learning one of these Western solos using this notation, but on tabla. And through this, learning with this Western notation, I became more interested actually in learning about the oral tradition and the origins of tabla as it comes from in India. So I just kept thinking about that and decided, it would be cool to do some more research and transcribe a tabla solo using this notation system so that Western musicians, such as myself as I began, could again have this bird's eye view of how a tabla solo progresses. Because that, like, I was thinking back as to when I began tabla, like what was going through my mind, so many questions. So that's kind of the focus of this document that I wrote, this dissertation, was I wanted to spread awareness of tabla and the Benares gharana, this lineage of tabla playing in India. So I talked a lot about the history of the drums and the oral tradition, because those things are absolutely crucial, right, in the performance practices. So that's like the main first half of my document. And actually, I was so happy to hear Dr. Frances Shepard's talk on Tuesday night at this workshop, because her dissertation is one of the primary sources that I would just read through all night long for years to learn more about this tradition. And so then, after writing about that, I wanted to, I guess the unique portion of my dissertation was creating a transcription of a tabla solo that a beginner could look at and say, okay, this is how we get from point A in a tabla solo to point B in a tabla solo, right? There's so many compositions. And I thought this would be a helpful tool for Western musicians that don't grow up surrounded by Indian classical music. So the target audience for this is, like I've been mentioning, Western musicians that understand Western rhythmic and melodic notation. But for the purposes of this talk, if you don't identify with that audience, please don't check out completely, because I think you'll still be able to gain knowledge of more overall aspects of what I'm going to talk about. So I hope you learned something. And we have two different kind of audiences here now that I've invited so many of my personal friends and family. So the workshop people obviously have a deeper understanding of this. So I'm really talking to you all, and I apologize if I can't explain everything in a more basic level for the other people, but I hope you still understand broader contexts. So let's just start with what happens in a tabla solo. We have a time cycle, and in the case for tonight, I'm talking about tintal, which is 16 beats. So we have this 16-beat time cycle, and then within that time cycle, we have an accompanimental instrument that is performing this melody that repeats over 16 beats. So this looping melody called the lera, and that can be played on a harmonium or a violin or sarangi, other Indian melodic instruments. And then over that melody that's recurring, we have the tabla player who performs a series of compositions that are either fixed or improvised. So here are these compositions, and so this would be like the very basic structure of a tabla solo. And one thing I really like about Shawn's teaching, that I've kind of adopted as well in my document, and just the way I think about this, is categorizing these compositions into different, like, broader, larger sections: an introduction, development, and a conclusion. So the introduction starts with a bhumika and utan. Generally speaking, they're played together. A bhumika is played at a very slow tempo, called vilambit, and you'll hear slower rhythms producing really full capacity of sound on the instrument. The one thing that's unique about the bhumika is there's no resonant bass sound. All of the bass is generally done with closed sounds. Then when you start to hear a resonant bass sound, that's signaling that we've moved on to the next composition, the utan. So then you can say, okay, he's moved on to the next composition, utan. These rhythms start to get a little bit more dense, a little bit faster, and it will end with a ti. And a ti is a cadential phrase that repeats 3 times, such that the last note will coincide with the downbeat of, or beat 1 of the cycle. Generally speaking, it doesn't have to, but most of the time it does, to create that tension, syncopation, and then release and resolution on beat one. So utan will end with a ti. If you don't play the bhumika and utan, you could start off a composition with a mukara or mora, and these are short compositions that emphasize beat one. I kind of compare them to like drum set fills at the end of like an 8-bar phrase or something in Western rock music. The difference between mora and mukra is mora has that cadential ti, and mukra does not. So that is kind of an overview of the introductory compositions. Then we move on to the development section. And this is kind of where the performer has the opportunity to do more improvisation and explore different permutations with the different rhythms that we're playing on the drums. So kaida is a fixed theme that has what's called a kuli mundi form, and it's kind of like a rhyme. So we would have these bowls or these sounds on the drum, like da da te te da da tenna. And then it rhymes with taking out the bass, ta ta te te, and then the bass returns da da te te. So that's in a nutshell what's happening when you have a kaida. You have a theme that's presented with bass, and the first two elements of it. The third element removes the bass, and then the fourth element brings the bass back in. Then after that, we have a series of palta, or variations, that the performer is actually improvising. And then the kaida will end with a ti, that cadential phrase. Rela has a similar structure to kaida, but it uses a specific types of bowls or sounds on the drums that allow the performer to play at faster speeds. So it's a little bit, it kind of mimics the sound of a train. Rela means train, and so it's played at really fast speeds, and that mimics that sound. What's special about Rela, though, is then we have these two types of compositions that are played alongside of it. So you have Rela, you have your theme with that Kuli Mundi theme, and then you have different variations. And then after a while, you might hear the tempo just drop in half. So it's going fast, and then very slowly. We just split the tempo in half, and then it dropped. And that's signaling that we're starting a gut or a fard. And a gut is, it keeps that Kuli Mundi rhyme, that bass, bass, no bass, bass, same as the kaida. But what's special about these compositions is they are presented in 3 or 2 different speeds. So you have that slower speed, half tempo, and then it might jump to twice as fast and perform the same composition, just twice as fast, and then you would go back into the Rela variations, and then you would play another gut, or you might play a fard. And a fard is similar. You have multiple speeds in the fard. You drop to half tempo and then double it. But the difference between gut and fard is fard does not have to have that Kuli Mundi rhyme to it. Then, after the development section, we move to the conclusion section of the solo with tukras and parans. And these, basically what happens is if you have teka, which is, as we know in the workshop, the 16 beats that we're showing on the tabla, if we're at a slow tempo, da, da, din, din, da, da, din, din, da, da, then it jumps twice as fast. So da, din, din, da, da, din, din, da, da, din, din, da, da. And then that kind of signals to the audience that we've moved on to tukras and parans, and we're in this faster tempo, and then we play these series of compositions that are performed twice. Once orally, where we speak the sounds that we're about to play, and then we perform it on the drums. And these compositions also end with a ti. The difference between tukras and parans are the tukras generally, they're bursts of virtuosic technique that favor non-resonant sounds like dere dere, for example, and parans emphasize repetitive phrasing and tend to favor the resonant bass, because parans stylistically come from the pakawaj, which is this is a modern version of it, but this is sort of what a pakawaj used to be. It's a barrel-like drum, and this was the predecessor to the tabla. And so that style of playing was using a lot of bass. And so you'll hear repetitive phrasings and patterns and a lot of bass sounds. So that's kind of a brief overview of the tabla solo structure. And then next, I talk a lot about those more in depth in my document, and then I had to figure out how I'm going to transcribe a solo. And I chose the Mativetsky McDonald notation system because it makes clear for Western musicians exactly what's going on. So on the top line here, you can see in Devanagari, the Hindi script, na, na, tin, din, and then underneath I have it written in Roman script. And this can often be confusing for learners, at least in my experience, knowing, is na played, and you can see on the diagram chanti, the rim here. Sometimes na is played there. Sometimes na is played on lao, which is more in that white space right next to the black circle called the siai. And then sometimes you have na that is played on lao, but sometimes in compositions na is on the siai. Sometimes ten is played here, sometimes ten is open. Same thing with din. Because of this oral tradition, it just changes in the context of the composition when we're speaking it. And so that's kind of difficult to write down. But what I really like about the McDonald-Mativetsky notation system for tabla is it makes crystal clear which sound is desired. So, for example, na belongs to this line on the staff. So anytime I see that, I know, okay, it's na. Suppose I want na on lawa, on this other portion of the drum, then I would choose the tin notation, but write na above it. So I know, okay, na is played on lao here, but we're going to use this notation system, so that's clear. Similarly, if I want what's traditionally tin here, then I will use that notation. Or if I want open 10, we also call that tun in the oral context. So I would use the tun notation and just write 10 above it. So it's super clear if someone's reading a transcription what is being played there. Ge is down here at the bottom of the staff. And that's another thing I really like about this notation system is it's intuitive for Western learners because the higher you go on the staff, the higher the pitch reference. So ge is at the bottom of the staff, that's our lowest pitch. And then at the top of the staff we have na, that's one of our higher pitches. And together, if we put them together, we get a compound pitch of da. So this is just a brief overview of how the notation system works. And I'll give you some context here. Ge, 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 ge. Na, 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 na. Da, 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 da. Ki, ki, te, te. Dara, dara, ki, te, taka, da. And here's a tukra, so a conclusion composition that I've transcribed using this. Ki, te, taka, ta. Te, 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 taka, te. Ki, te, taka, ga, de, ki, na, da. Kita takata na da kradin na gina teteka. Takita katakarigina da gina teteka. Takita katakarigina da gina teteka. Takita katakarigina da. So then the third thing, I guess the third thing that I've the strength of this notation system is okay. We've talked about the rhythm is clear, the contour is clear. I'm sorry, we talked about the contour is clear, the pitch is clear, and then the rhythm is super clear. As you can see from this, if you're in the target audience that understands Western rhythmic notation, this it makes sense immediately. And that's one thing when we learn through the oral tradition and when we were trying to write down these compositions, we're like, well, hold on a second, how does this go again? Like, what's the rhythmic phrase? I think this does a good job at making that crystal clear for a beginning student trying to learn more about the oral tradition. So next I'd like to give you a brief, some excerpts of my transcription. I start off with a wonderful bhumika we all learned from Shawn. And so on and so forth. And then what's neat is, okay, person, a beginner reading this, can read in the margins and then see the introduction of bass with that low note on the staff, right? Ah, this must be the utan because bass is introduced. Um, and then I also give an example of a tihai showing these repetition of three phrases that coincide with sam, which is the downbeat of the cycle. Next, I give an example. After we do the bhumika utan and then a tihai with the utan, we move on to teka to show that we're in 16 beats. So I give an example of teka, and then you can see where the bass is removed in the third vibha, where da goes to the tin, and then the bass returns. You can visually see what's going on there. Then I give an example of kisme, which is when we're improvising ornamentations or elaborating on teka, right? Da, din, da, din, da, da, din. Obviously, the performer can come up with what he or she chooses, but this is just an example to see what you might use rhythmically in kisme. Then we move into kaida, and I use the very basic beginner kaida that we all start with, da da te te da da tina, that I just explained, to show the kuli and the mundi section, where the bass is in the beginning, da da te te da da tina, and then with mundi the bass is removed, ta ta te te, and the bass returns da da dinna. And then underneath that, the kaida moves into double speed, right? So we start the kaida off always in a single speed, slow speed, and then it's doubled twice as fast. And then we go into our series of variations, our paltas. And generally with the first palta, even though these are improvised, the first palta usually we double it, double the length, so we have more room to improvise. So we usually take we start off with pinch, right? Which is we take, so da da te te da da tina. Well, we take the first half of that, da da te te, and we repeat that, da da te te, and then we play kaida, da da te te da da tina. And then we perform that in the mundi version, right? Where we remove the bass and we get ta ta te te, ta ta te te, and then the bass returns with kaida, da da te te da da dinna. Then from there, we might, we might group some words or bowls together, right? So from here we have to improvise. And so I list in the margins some logic, I guess my logic for going to this palta here. So the reader can understand why you're doing that, right? So we might group the das together from the first palta and create da 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 for the first half of the new palta, and then we'll group the tes together from the previous palta to fill up the rest of the space, te 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 te, followed by kaida as usual, and then you have the mundi version of that, where you remove the bass, and then the bass returns with kaida in the second half. From here, I play with some number compositions. So we group the das together with 3 plus 2 plus 1. Da 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 te te, da da te te, da te te, da da te na. And then ta 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 te te, da ta te te, da te te, da da dinna, where the bass returns. Then we can do the reverse of that and do 1 plus 2 plus 3. And then we could do the middle version of that, 2 plus 1 plus 3, for example. And these are just all of us in the workshop, we understand this. This is just, I'm just giving a brief example of how I lay it out in my transcription with some blurb in the margins for the reader to understand what's happening. I also give an example of an Angustana kaida. An Angustana is a special type of composition where basically instead of using this closed sounds, the faster speeds, we open the sound and it becomes a little bit more resonant. But the reason I choose this composition is actually to show the rhythmic syncopation that's going on, because that's another strength, I think, of this notation system. So the lera, the accompanist, is emphasizing the beat. This is an ari, so groups of 3. So you can see these 3 note heads that are beamed together, 3 of them together. So that's what the lera is emphasizing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But then I show above these slur markings, these phrase markings, and that is actually the grouping of notes that the tabla player is emphasizing. So every 4 beats. And that creates this really fun 4 against 3 friction between the tabla player and the accompanist, right? So you get this And then you have the mundi section. So it's kind of fun to visually see how that's happening, right? Sometimes we'll listen to these famous maestro tabla players perform, or listen to a CD, and they're doing all this weird rhythmical stuff, but they're playing at the lightning speeds that it's hard to decipher. So this is just one beginning version to understand what's going on. And then I go through a series of palta and variations with this one too, but we won't go through that. So then next in the composition, after you're done with your kaidas, you'll move to rela, which is the faster kaida, and this is just to show how we move from a palta, a variation in rela, into a gut, right? The speed drops in half, so we're going, and then we have, so this is an ari in groups of 3, and then we would play another level of speed, so we would move to groupings of 4, and then we would take it one step further and play double speed before we move on to our rela palta again. And then we could continue playing other guts or fards, or we can move the ti and keep going. And the solo. So then suppose we go to our ti, we continue back to teka, which is kind of our palate cleanser in between compositions, where we go da, din, din, da, da, to show the 16-beat time cycle. Then we go twice as fast if we're going to start going to the conclusion portion of the solo. So instead of da, din, din, now we're going da, din, din, da, da, din, din, da, da. And then you're, as an audience member, understanding, oh, okay, he's moving along to the conclusion. And then we start a series of tukras or parans, and here's an example of tukra. And like I said, it's performed twice, so I use this repeat sign that we have in Western notation to signal the first time we're going to recite the bowl, and the second time through the composition we'll perform it on the drums, on the tabla. So that, in conclusion, that is the purpose of this transcription, right? To show this bird's eye view of how a tabla solo progresses. So a Western learner who's unfamiliar with the oral tradition, unfamiliar with anything about Indian classical music, can at least have a foundation of where to start to understand what's going on, right? So it's really meant to be used as a bridge to connect one system of music to the other. So, because my goal is to spark interest in the oral tradition, not to diminish it by any means. I really value the oral tradition, and I think it's absolutely necessary, especially and to have a teacher, right? Because the technical facility required of this instrument, you can't learn that from a book by any means. So that's by no means the purpose. The purpose is to be this secondary resource for a student to go to and geek out over, like we do in these workshops, I guess. Just as you would read somebody's dissertation or somebody's book for additional knowledge, that's the purpose of this too. So this here is kind of all of those things that I mentioned earlier, all the cliff notes, so to speak, of how the solo progresses in one slide. And normally if I were performing this live for you all, I would have this projected on a screen behind me while I perform the solo. But I don't want to keep it up here on this screen because it's too cluttered for watching a solo. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen, but I will paste a link to that slide in the chat function here, so that if you are at a computer or able to download it, you're welcome to, and then just have it nearby so you can reference that as I introduce a new composition. Let me see if I can do that. Okay, so I just posted a link to the chat section, and it should work. It's like access to everybody, so you have it. And then I'm going to start my tabla solo now, so you have sort of an oral reference to everything I've been talking about. And at the end, I will be glad to take some questions. So we'll start with the Bhumika and Uttan and go from there. just check my tuning. Oh, that's why. So we start with a bhumika with no resonant bass. When you hear the resonant bass, that signals the uttan. To finish up the uttan, we're going to take a and I move to a kaida. So you'll hear the theme presented once in a slow speed. Then I'm going to play the theme twice as fast, followed by a series of improvised variations. that concludes one kaida. To the Angustana kaida, so the 4 against 3 I was talking about. And that concludes another kaida. So we'll move to the Rela section. So we have slightly faster bowls are used for this. And after some palta, after some variations, you'll hear the gut or fard fixed compositions. That will be at multiple different speeds. that concludes the Rela, gut, and Fard compositions. So from here, we'll move to the conclusion portion, which is the Kukras and Parans. So Teika will move twice as fast. I'll recite the compositions, and then I'll perform them. Next, I'll play a paran. So, repetitive phrases and lots of bass. So my last composition I'll play for you all, it's called a Farmaisi Tukra, and what's special about this is the Tihai. In the end, you have 3 Das, right, in the Tihai, and normally we wait for the last Tihai to finally land with Sam, with the first beat of the cycle. What's special about this is each of the Das will land up with Sam at one point in time. So the first time through the cycle, through the composition, the first Da will line up with beat 1. And the second time through the composition, the second Da in the Tihai will line up with beat 1. And then the third and final time, the third da will line up as we would expect. So, it's my last composition. Hope you've enjoyed. Dinna, 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 dagna, dagna, dakata, dakata, datarikata, datakata, dagina, da. Darikina, darikina, narikina, dat kranda. Darikina, natrina, natrina, dat kranda. Darikina, natrina, natrina, dat kranda. Dinna, 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 dagna, dagna, dakata, dakata, datarikata, datakata, dagina, da. Darikina, natrina, natrina, dat kranda. Darikina, natrina, natrina, dat kranda. Darikina, natrina, natrina, dat kranda. Dinna, 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 dagana, dagana, takata, takata, natarigana, datata, kataka, takina, da. Darigina, natrina, natrina, dat kranda. Darigina, natrina, natrina, dat kranda. Darigina, natrina, natrina, dat kranda. Thank you all. Thank you so much. That concludes my solo for you all tonight and my lecture as well. And I hope you enjoyed it. I'm excited to take some questions from you all. And thank you, Ravi, for the great job. I was just seeing the comments there. Thank you all so much. Yeah, I don't know. Let's see if there's comments in the comments here, or if you all want to raise hands. Let me see if I can read this. I see lots of stuff in the chat. Wow, thank you. Yeah, I guess, well, first of all, I want to thank my teachers, Shawn Mativetsky, again, for all of his help. All of these compositions were taught to me either from Shawn or from his guru by Pandit Kishore Kumar Mishra in Varanasi. I'm indebted for life to both of them for teaching me these beautiful compositions. So thank you, Shawn and Kishorji. And yeah, I will take some questions. I don't know. Shawn, if you you can probably read the screen better than I can. My screen is so small here. So if you want to chime in.
Sure. I'm not. Ravi has his hand up.
Oh, great. Ravi, go for it. I guess you can unmute yourselves and then, yeah.
Yeah. First of all, very good. Got a lot. That was very nice.
Thank you.
Well played. Those are some tough compositions. I wanted to ask. Well, first of all, when you got to, I just have some questions about your experience in Benares.
Absolutely.
When you first got there, did you, obviously, it must have taken you some time to adjust. How, health-wise, were you okay in the first few weeks, or was it like?
So yeah, I arrived in Varanasi in I think September 2nd last year, and I'm so glad I went then. Originally I was going to go over the summer just because of the logistics of everything, and that would have been a nightmare because the heat would have been like 150 or something. But the heat was still an issue when I got there in September. It was like 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Sorry, I don't know the Celsius. But yeah, it was a nightmare starting off for 2 weeks, getting used to that. Luckily, the place I was staying at had air condition in the rooms, so I had some place to just retreat to when it was too overwhelming. But I would say it took me a good solid 2 weeks, maybe even a month, before I finally got over the culture shock of, the density of population there is something I've not experienced, right? That is a small city of 4 million people. Small. What? So, and being a very tall individual, those of you who
You're like God there.
I'm 6'7", and so yeah, I stick out like a sore thumb over there, and everyone's just like staring at me, and I'm like, oh my gosh. But eventually, yeah, I found the people to be just so kind, and that was the most helpful thing. I was staying with an amazing family host family who treated me like family, and so that I think really helped things a lot. So I had like amazing food there, and then just kind people to kind of teach me some Hindi along the way as well. And then my lessons with Kishorji were, I could not have asked for a better teacher. He was just the most kind, inviting person. You know, we started meeting 3 days a week when I first got there, and luckily his place was like a 5 minute walk away from where I was staying. I did that strategically. I tried to get as close as I could. Um, and so we would meet about 3 days a week, and then and that was intense for me, right? I used to meeting Shawn like once every month or something on Skype or something, and so you know, the more I was able to process faster, right, the information that's being taught orally, then the faster I was picking up on the compositions. Then Kishorji was inviting me more frequently, and by the end of my 6 months there, I was going 6 days
Six
a
months.
week,
Wow.
which was awesome. So every day I would start my day and go over there for 2 hours, and we would practice together. And then like halfway through, we would stop and drink chai. That was a must. Like we wouldn't get through the
Oh,
entire
chai,
practice
yeah.
session without order up
Yeah.
some chai, and then we drink.
Some kachoris
Um,
too.
yes, absolutely. And so then after that, I would learn all these compositions and write them down, and then I would go home. I would have lunch, and then I would practice for another couple hours to try to just soak it all up and be ready for the next lesson. So I was practicing like 5 hours, 5, 6 hours a day on average. And then on top of that, I got really into yoga as well, which was super helpful, kind of like and necessary for some physical activity. I brought my like running shoes, thinking I was going to jog. Absolutely not. There's just no room for that over there. So I got into yoga. I had like a yoga teacher, and that was really helpful and calming as well because of the chaos in the city and everything, and just all the constant nonstop music. It was nice to just have something to take my mind off of that. So that's kind of like I think all of those things helped me get over that culture shock, and I absolutely loved it though. I would still be there right now if I if I could be. It was so
Great.
fun.
Glad to hear it. Yeah, hopefully we can go back soon because there's it feels like it's gonna be impossible now.
I know.
Anyways, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank
So-
you. Francis, I think I saw her hand up. Yes. I don't know. She's muted. Did you have a question?
Yeah, Francis, just unmute yourself. Yeah.
Here, I'll do it. I think I got it. Maybe.
All right, right.
Oh, she got
Well,
it.
that was great. Well
Thank
done.
you.
And it's great to hear that you fell in love with Benares, like I did. So that's fabulous, and I really do think the way you presented the solo and the repertoire is really helpful and useful and really gives one another way into hearing the music and understanding it. But I have one question.
Yes.
What I discovered, I think, when I was studying it, is that I realized that the tabla players weren't hearing the music, or the musicians weren't hearing the tabla the way I heard it. So I heard it's pitched, different pitches, and it seemed to me that they heard it differently. They heard loud and soft, and timbre. So I used to test every tabla player I came across, or a musician. I would say, "All right, now listen to this ta and na, and tell me what's the difference." And without fail, it was always loud and soft. And no matter how I prompted them with pitch, they never heard. They never said to me that they heard pitch. So
Yeah.
but I know that I heard it as pitch. And then I tried to train myself not to hear it that way, but to hear timbre loud and soft. And I got halfway there, but not all the way.
I know, right? It's like
Yeah.
a lifetime, I think, to convert over. I definitely had some similar revelations. It's interesting that you bring that up. I think the difference, I guess, like na on Chanti versus na on Lao. That was like a completely different sound. And to my ears at the time, I'm like, well, I mean, I know we played Tin Ta and there's a difference, but I didn't realize in my own technique it was so bad that like they just sounded the same. And I was accompanying a sarangi player at one point over there, playing some teka or something, and she was saying, I just can't hear like a difference between your na and your tin. Could you like, make one a little bit like make the na louder? And I was like, what do you mean louder? That was I think similar
I
to what
think that confirms, yes, my feeling,
yes,
because
what
they
you're
hear loud and
saying.
soft. They don't hear high and low, but we hear it high and low. And I used to
Right.
test all the Westerners, and I would say, "Well, what are you hearing?" And it would be high and low, and then do it with them, and it was loud and soft.
Yes. Yeah, that's such an interesting. Yeah, and I wonder if I think that just has to do with how each of our cultures are brought up with music, right? We have a very harmonic sense of music in the West, and over there everything is very melodic, and they just have, um, and maybe that has something to do with it. I wonder.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's an interesting.
another avenue for somebody to do some heavy research on.
Absolutely, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, but thank you. Well done.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you since I've basically, yeah, learned so much from you just through your own research. So that's
Well,
really
thank
great to
you.
hear.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Kingsley, I think I saw your hand.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Um, it's amazing how much you've progressed since the last workshop. I mean, there's just so much material and so much stuff there. Really, really amazing. Um, my question was, I knew about the Mativetsky method of writing that stuff in Western music. And, even today in the workshop and in previous workshops, something that I've definitely struggled with the tricky rhythms, with the simple rhythm, because we're sitting there and it's an oral tradition, as you know, right? So they don't write these things down and, underlining things. And first, I'm a computer person, so I can't even read my own handwriting. I won't even understand it, 2 hours after the class. I've got a book full of stuff like 6 months old, and I don't know what it is just because I haven't written it down. So one of my coping strategies from the workshops in previous years is just to record it, and then I can hear it because I'll know the notes. As long as I get the fingering and the notes, I don't really worry about the rhythm. I just try to get Shawn to record it or to recite it so that I can record it, and that way I can kind of piece it together. And then once I know it, then I can write it down in either the Western way or with the right underlines because I know it. And the thing is, by the time I know it, I don't need to do that because I know it. So it's one of those things. But my question is, are you sometimes writing, I'm just wondering, when you learn things in India in the traditional way, did you go home and write them down in Western notation? Or did you just memorize it and clap it and tap it and internalize it? And then once you know it, you kind of know it. I'm just wondering if you leverage that Western, notation for your own studies.
Yes, that is a good question. And I did a little bit of it. So that was my original intent, was to go over there and then come home immediately and input this into my music notation software, Finale, on the computer. Um, but it turned out I kept procrastinating at that simply because of the learning curve on how to put that in a notation system. I guess if I had handwritten it out, it wouldn't have been a problem. But it took me a while to finally just like, because I wanted to practice, right? So what I would do is kind of something similar. I didn't often record, but I would write it down with the Bakani notation system that we have, and I think, okay, let me I guess back up. Uh, I would play it over and over again because I had these 2 hour lessons with him like 3 days a week or something. We would sit there and just repeat these compositions over and over again. Sometimes one line of a composition for like 30 minutes at a time, right? Because we just had that much time to spend on it. And so because of that, the oral tradition absolutely works, right? Like 100%. You're ingraining it into your mind. And so that's why I think oral tradition is truly the best way to learn this. And over there, you're surrounded by that culture, and it works. In our situation in the West, oftentimes our lessons are like 50 minutes long, and there's just not enough time for that. So that's why the recording helps. Yeah. But then to answer your question, I did find when I would write these compositions out in Western notation, it helped me actually process it differently. I saw the T highs differently because I knew exactly where I could visually see where they line up within the vibhag, within the measure. I could see, I could just sort of visually then, like as I'm playing it, track it in my mind, I guess in a different way. And it's kind of hard to explain, but yeah, I noticed when I would write it down personally, I would just process these things different, and I felt like I got like a deeper knowledge of the composition in a way. And so that's why I'm kind of hoping like that, you know, if one day when I do actually publish a book with this stuff in it, hopefully it would benefit other Western learners as well. But yeah, the problem is just inputting it all into the computer. It takes, as you know, as a computer person,
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Did I answer your question? I kind of went on a tangent.
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering because you're kind of you've got one foot in each camp, right?
Yeah.
So I've done that too. But I realized, and this has come up with my lessons with Shawn, that once I know it, I know it. You know, I know how it is. So if I need to write, I don't need to. At one point, I was very meticulous about writing these things down, but you know, they don't read these things. You need to know them, and
Absolutely.
if you know it, then that is less important. I wouldn't spend a lot of time writing down a kaida I already know because I already know it. And if I need, I know exactly how it works, so I can write it down at any time. So then I realized all of my emphasis on writing this stuff down and putting it in the computer so I could have it printed up. It's really, it needs to be in your hands and in your head so that you can play it, you know?
Absolutely, I agree. And that is, yeah, you have to have that oral tradition in order to really excel with this instrument, right? Because all of this improvisation is theoretically going to happen on the spot, which sounds kind of like, how is that possible? But the more it's in your hands and the more it's in your mind, then your mind is able to track the composition faster on the spot, and you can do more with it. So I think I would just clarify that like the intent of this notation system in my mind is not to write everything down with it, but simply just to create a beginning resource for somebody to understand rhythmically how a tabla solo progresses. Oh, okay, I got it. Oh, I'm kind of interested in this. I want to learn more about the oral tradition, and then they, you know, find other resources to learn through the oral tradition.
So, Sebastian, Robert had a question, but he wasn't able to. He's having microphone problems, so he wrote in the chat. In your experience, what is the easiest way to notate tihais, or chakradars, or moras? So
Well, my only
notation. Yeah.
yeah. So in terms of notation, is that the question? Like how to notate it? The best way in my experience. I mean, I've learned the Bhatkandi notation system. Obviously, like the Indian notation system for writing the bowls down. That I would say is the fastest way to notate this by far. Right? You're just writing these letters down. But then it gets messy, and you're like, you go back to it later, kind of to Kingsley's point, and you're like, well, hold on, I kind of forgot about how the phrasing went on that because we were writing so quickly in these lines, and what does that mean if I have a comma through that line there, or whatever, if it's a tihai. So I do find that the notation system, the Bhatkandi notation system, can be confusing when you're juggling a lot of compositions at once, but it's definitely the fastest. So in my experience, writing it out using Western rhythmic notation is the clearest because it just absolutely makes sense. Even if you're taking it at one speed and then later you take it at twice as fast, at least you can see it in reference very clearly how the rhythms are supposed to be without any mistake and error. Whereas the Bhatkandi notation system, I think that's more of like everybody's personal like chicken scratch, so to speak. Like it makes sense to you. You might write something differently in your case or something, but it makes sense to you. Then that's great. So yeah, I think if the question is like, what is the best way? I mean, like, I think if you're learning tabla, the Bhatkandi notation system eventually is the best, like, easiest way to continue writing compositions down. I think the Western script, though, is really helpful for beginners who are not familiar with that. And I've seen some other research out there. There's somebody that lives in Australia, I think. He's done something similar to my notation system, I guess transcription, except he doesn't have the like harmonic approach to it, right? Now all of the sounds of the drums are not pitched, so to speak, on a staff. It's all just on one line, but uses Western notation system. So that's helpful for the rhythm. But I don't know. I think it's kind of cool to see the visual contour as well. Like if you're using like two drums happening at the same time on the staff. I'm just a visual learner, so I enjoy the McDonald Mativetsky notation for that too. Yes. Did Peter have a question, or
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi, Sebastian.
Hello, Peter.
It was great. Really well done. It was like great playing and a wonderful dissertation. I'd love to get a copy of that. But I just wanted to say that seeing your transcription with all we're talking about was a revelation to me as a longtime piano player. You know, I struggle with Shawn, you know, asking him to write things out. And I think I'm going to, just to see it there, it was like so clear, you know, the contour of things. It was just, for me, it was just a natural. I mean, I understand that at the end of the day, the strength of the oral thing and the repetition as it becomes muscle memory. And once it's muscle memory, you don't have to worry about it anymore. But it's getting there through the writing the bowls and underlining them and figuring out the rhythms to be able to see the things together like that was great, you know. And so it's the first time I've seen that, and it was pretty interesting. And also, I don't know whether Francis is still there, but this thing of the pitch versus timbre, that's another thing that's it's been sort of at the back of my mind, a very interesting thought that, you know, the loud, soft pitch thing too, yeah. Anyway, listen, great work. Great work, really impressive.
Thank you so much, that means a lot.
Yeah.
Dylan, I think I saw, had a question maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had, maybe this is kind of directed to Shawn, because that was the first time I saw that system, notation system, which was, yeah, I saw that as being helpful, but yeah, the number of staffs line, I was just wondering about that. Just getting a call here just a second.
Maybe another question while we wait for
yeah, Ravi had his hand up again.
I was going to ask, did you try any pawn?
Pawn, absolutely. So yeah, so for those of you that don't know, pawn is like it's like this petal leaf. It's this special leaf that is wrapped with all of these different exotic spices from India. It's really like an explosion in your mouth. Like, I don't know, a lot of maybe cardamom and like cinnamon and all these really sweet and interesting flavors. But I'll tell you, so the pan is everywhere in Benares. But the most interesting pan I had was actually, I was visiting Delhi with my sister and her husband. They were visiting me for a week, and we went, somebody recommended this pawn shop. It was like a kind of like a I don't know, just an event to experience. And it was called Ice Pawn and Fire Pawn, and this was insane. So they they make pawn, and then they stuff the leaf with this huge cube of ice as well, and then you put that all in your mouth, and you can't like, you just have to chew. You can't like swallow. It's ice, right? And so your teeth are just like going crazy, all these sensations. And then you try the fire one, and that also is something so they put something in it, and then they light the thing on fire and literally shove it into your mouth while it's still on fire, and then all of the oxygen and whatever in your mouth like takes that out. But it's just, it was an experience to try. If you're ever in Delhi, let me know. I'll like send you where this location is.
Yeah, I guess when you practice, I'm sure Kishorji, they had it when they practiced.
Interestingly, no, he didn't eat it that often. I did, like when we would go to concerts, there was definitely this one man in particular. I remember he would always have pawn at every concert. Or if he didn't bring it, somebody next to him knew he wanted it, so he just like reach into his pocket and hand it, and so he's just like chewing on pawn for this whole. I didn't personally. I didn't eat or chew a lot of it, but I did definitely try it. It's very
nice.
Dylan, I think he's back now. Maybe.
Yeah, I was just curious about why the use of the whole staff compared to it seems like, yeah, one line or a rhythm line would do it, but.
Sure, yeah. And it absolutely would, right? Like, and to that degree, then, well, we don't need the staff at all. We can just use the bed-counting notation system. And, but the reason I like the staff, the full staff, is because, again, I'm a visual person, and I like to see, you know, the visual contour, the pitch, not pitch because they're not actually pitches, like defined pitches, but the timbral contour, I guess. If I'm playing a higher note, it's higher up on the staff. Really, that aspect of the notation system is more helpful for Western musicians in Western contexts, right? A flute player playing with a tabla player can at least look at the notation and understand some sort of pitch relationship, timbre relationship. So that's why that Shawn, I think, created that. And because it's already in the notation system, I just use it, right? I didn't want to like reinvent the wheel since it was already there, so I just used that. I found that to be the clearest notation system that existed at the time for tabla, and so I was like, oh, well, I'll just use this. And to my eyes, it's just kind of nice too to see like everything going on. Because think about it, tabla has like 15 different sounds we can create with it, right? And so it's kind of like a piano. A piano can technically create 12 distinct notes, and then we have different octaves of them. So that's why we have all of these different pitches on the staff for piano. So here we have 15 distinct like sounds as well. So it's kind of cool to see them shown visually as well, in relation to one another. So,
Yeah, definitely. It especially seeing, I thought, the Cooley Mundi structure. You really see that in a way that
yeah,
it's not apparent otherwise.
yeah, absolutely. That's a good point.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I could say though, there's actually one line that's not actually used at all. That's the second line from the bottom. One composer did decide to just remove that line from the notation, so you have 3 lines and then a space and then the bottom line. But it wasn't worth revising the whole notation system just over that. Why 5 lines and not 2 or 3 from the beginning? I mean, the easy answer is that that's what Peyton came up with in the very beginning, and we just continued with that. And really, it's very consistent with drum set notation, right? So it's similar to other existing systems also. So yeah, it was just, again, why reinvent the wheel when there's systems that are already in place, right? That it's very similar to.
Would you be getting, because this is for orchestral modern compositions, right? Like before that, could you even play tabla in the orchestra? Kind of, was there a system at all, or is that?
No, well, so like the first I'd say Western composed piece really for tabla is Bob Becker's Palta, and he would write all the rhythms using Western notation on a single line with the bowls underneath. So if you're a tabla player, a traditionally trained tabla player, you could just read the bowls. And if you're like a crossover tabla player, you can read the rhythm and read the bowls. But if you didn't know those compositions, you wouldn't necessarily know Lao Chanti, open tin versus Lao tin. Like you wouldn't, if you didn't know those compositions, you wouldn't necessarily know how to interpret them correctly. So there's that reason. There's also the so I one the first concerto that was written for me with orchestra used that kind of system, a single line of rhythm with bowls underneath. It was fine for me, but for the conductor, it said nothing, right? So you have like, I don't know, but for them, it looks like right. There's no sense of contour. There's no sense of one sound versus 2 sounds, high and low, open and closed. There's none of that, right? So this is where once this first concerto was 2002, 2003, and then Peyton was writing pieces independent of that, different composers writing different pieces, and as soon as he came up with this notation, then he came up with the initial version, and then I expanded it, basically, because the initial composition that he wrote didn't involve all the sounds, so we needed to expand the notation to include more of the tones. And then that just became like the system that I would recommend to any composer that I ever collaborated with. And then other composers, even ones that weren't collaborating with me, they were writing for other tabla players, started to contact me about this system. Because again, why create a new system when there's already one? Right? So, though that's not to say that some other composers didn't use other systems, but in my opinion, that they're not as intuitive, because maybe they use 2 lines or 1 line, or for the same reasons that we talked about. It's just clearer when you have all the sounds spread out. Yeah, so it just kind of evolved that way. Yeah.
See any? Yeah, Maxime, I think, has his hand up.
Yes. Hi, Sebastian. First of all, a great presentation. I really appreciate it. I wanted to ask you if you gathered comments when you did your dissertation from your target audience, as they were percussionists who wanted, maybe were interested in learning from the notation and then switching from the to the traditional. As you know, I experienced writing with this system, and I always found it was a kind of translation. And when I wrote a piece for Shawn, I kind of wrote it in both and then switching my mind into this notation. So I was curious if a percussionist will come the other way around, what they will think about that.
Yeah, I guess, it's so new, right? Like I just finished this in February. So I don't know if it's, been out there enough for me to know. Um, I have presented this lecture 3 times now. So once at Michigan State, and then I did like a Zoom session like this for some undergrads at Vanderbilt. And they are the first ones that like really were intrigued by this and like requested that I send them my dissertation so they could read about it. So I did, and I don't know yet, like if they've read it all the way through or if they're learning. I know that the 2 people in that particular class are interested in tabla and are learning, so I'll be interested to reach back out to them to see if they're finding some like benefits of it. But I think only time will tell like if it's helpful or not. I hope so.
Yeah, that's why I realized my question was like, oh, there still need times for the people to learn from the dissertation, but I needed to ask it to you.
Yeah,
Congrats.
thank you so much. So, any other questions? Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you all so much for listening. I do have to say, like, presenting this material, each time I've presented it so far, it's always very nerve-wracking to me because it is something so new, and like kind of like Frances was talking about in her dissertation on Tuesday, she felt like she was kind of like going against the grain with that. I've kind of had a similar feeling, especially as like a Westerner learning something from a different musical tradition that I didn't grow up with. Um, so it's really helpful for me to like hear your all's positive feedback as well, and just to know that okay, cool, like this could help and be beneficial to some people. So I'm glad that you all have enjoyed listening to it, and thank you, Shawn, again for inviting me to give this lecture. I really appreciate it. Peter, I think your hand is back up, maybe, or it's a wave. I don't know.
That's the
Okay, cool,
applause.
awesome. Well, thank you all again so much. It's been great. Have a great night, and I will see my fellow workshop people again tomorrow.
Yes, Tabla Workshop people, see you tomorrow. And tomorrow evening, we've got solos going on.
See you tomorrow. Thanks, Sebastian.
All right,
Good
thank you
evening,
all.
everybody.